Okay. This is the big take. If you don't take anything away from today, this is what you need to take away. That do not make assumptions. Do not fall into a trap where they're trying to make you make a stereotypical guess. Always, if the option is to inquire more about a client's background, that's going to be the correct option, right? You never want to make assumptions. You never want to assume that you are the expert on someone else's cultures. So that's like the biggest takeaway is like always be curious, always ask questions. And it is okay to ask questions. It's better than just assuming. A client is going to be in a better place if you ask a hard question about their background, about their identity, versus just assuming that because the way they look or the way they present, something is the way it is. So that's like my biggest advice for test purposes regarding that. Okay. I'm going to go back here and I'm going to ask in the chat though, how many of you, this is just kind of to get us thinking, how many of you in your agencies or placements, wherever you're working, ask questions about people's background in the intake? Surprisingly, a lot of people's intake processes don't ask, but how many of you, and what kind of questions do you ask? Is it about race, religion, identity, like, and what are some questions that might be appropriate or identities that might be appropriate to ask about? A lot of you are saying you do, which is great, and it actually gives you a lot of information, right? And then some people like me, if you were in certain settings, it was not part of it, and you kind of have to add this in yourself. Pronouns, religion, education, sexual orientation, spirituality. These are all really good questions to ask. And then you can also ask, how important is this to you, right? Because some people, like, maybe it's super important to them, and some clients, maybe they're like, you know, I was raised Catholic, but it's not important to me, or I don't practice that any longer. So you always want to make sure that you're asking those follow-up questions too. So just things to think about when we're talking about cultural considerations. It's not just race and ethnicity. We're going to focus on that today, but there's lots of identities and overlapping identities we can ask as well. Bonnie brought up a good point. You want to ask language preferences, right? Like, do not assume that English is their strongest language or their preferred language, even if they appear to be pretty fluent in English. So you don't want to also ask that. You don't want to assume that as well. You want to ask, what is your preferred language? Okay. You don't need to know this, like there's not going to be stat. This is just for you to know our clients are diverse. This is probably from 2020. So this has obviously changed. 13% of all Americans are foreign born, meaning they were born outside of the United States. 68% of those people born outside of the United States are high school grads, and 27% have a bachelor's degree. I put this in here because, you know, oftentimes the media portrays people born outside the United States as not being educated. There's all these narratives, and it's actually not true. So you always want to ask questions. And then in the United States, it's probably much higher than this now. This is just of who self-reported. 20% of people speak a language other than English. So we need to also ask language preferences as well when we are working with clients. Okay. For cultural considerations, don't go into any clinical setting assuming you're the expert in anything, right? You could also identify like with the same race or religion or whatever it is, gender, with a client, but that doesn't mean you have the same experiences, right? So I think for clinical considerations when you're working with people from diverse backgrounds, focus more on what you don't know and educate yourself, right? That's cultural humility. That's being humble. That's being curious. What do you need to learn about the client, right? Like, don't assume, oh, they say they identify as Catholic. I'm saying this because I was raised Catholic. Don't assume because they say they identify as Catholic and you were raised Catholic, you know everything about their practice, right? Don't assume that things are the way that your experiences were. So I always like to go over this. Treat clients as they want to be treated, not as how you would like to be treated. Because they each person, right? Dignity and worth of the person, meeting the client where they're at. That's really good psychotherapy, is to meet the clients where they're at. And so I'm glad Jenny brought that up. She said some cultures have a stigma on mental health treatment. So even coming in that door might be a big step for them, right? Or they might be a little bit more closed off for a bit. Or they might even say, I'm doing this in secret. No one else in my family even knows I'm coming to this, and they'd be really upset. So just things to think about as you are working with clients is always be curious and never make assumptions. And that's actually a question to ask, like, what brought you in? I've asked clients, like, and I've had clients, say, I'm really not sold on this mental health thing because X, Y, and Z. So that could be something you ask, like, what brought you in? Have you worked with a mental health provider in the past? These are all things you can ask. Okay. This is going to be that like blanket generalist for exam purposes, what you need to know about certain groups of people. We're going to start with Native American clients, Indigenous clients. This is for test purposes, right? What is important amongst Indigenous people, Native American clients? Interconnectedness is very important. So they're very much like holistic, mind, body, spirit. They all are connected and they all should be treated at the same time. If you get a question that says, what should you do? And there's a tribal elder or a tribal law, you need to defer to that tribal leader or tribal elder if given that choice on the exam. That's very, very important because we know that oftentimes in Native American Indigenous culture, that is who they are going to defer to for some decision making. That is who they find of very high regard in their communities. Know that this is, I just want to reiterate this, there is so much diversity within Native American Indigenous culture as well, right? There's different tribes, there's different geographic locations. So don't assume that every Native American client that comes in is going to present the same, right? There's differences in language, there's differences in traditions, there's many, many, many diverse layers for these clients. Do any of you work with Native American or Indigenous clients? I know sometimes people work on reservations or geographically you are in a location. So some people are saying yes. It really all depends on where you're at, where you're practicing. So some people might serve this population much more than other populations. Someone said they are Native American, right? So like these are just all things to consider when serving these clients. Intertribal problem solving and really conflict resolution is very important within Native American culture, Indigenous culture. So it's very important that if that is what the client has said is important to them, you're approaching problem solving from that lens. Also, I would say, if you are not well versed with any population we're going to talk about, find ways to become more educated on it. Seek supervision, ask questions, right? You don't want to just say, I don't know anything about this, so I'm going to refer out, right? It might be appropriate to refer out, but you definitely want to make sure that you are doing your job as a clinician to educate yourself as well. Okay. There's a healing forest metaphor with Indigenous clients, and it's one cannot take a sick tree from a sick forest, heal it, and put it back in the same environment, expecting that it will thrive. You got to treat the sick forest versus the sick tree. This is actually very different than like American culture where it's like, let's fix the problem and everything's good. This is the healing forest metaphor is much more holistic and systematic. So things to think about as well is it's much more like, let's treat the root of the problem versus just putting a Band-Aid over it. There was an act passed in 1978. I don't think you will see this on the exam, but it's just for context. It was called the Indian Child Welfare Act of 1978. Why it was put in place is Native American children were being placed in foster care outside of their tribes at a very, very high rate. It was problematic. There was a lot of problems with it. They were being placed outside of their culture. They were being raised in mostly predominantly white culture. So there was an act passed that basically said, if possible, we want to place them within their culture, within their community, specifically for child welfare. In some geographic locations, that's not always possible, but that was the purpose of this act. In Native American tribes have rights and legal powers with respect to, this is due to the act. As you can see, the language is a little outdated. With respect to Indian children, and have a legal right to determine whether Indian children should be separated from their families and culture. Someone said in Canada, it's called the Indian Act. So yes, this is a US law that was passed in 1978. Okay. That's, like I said, this is going to be really quick. So it's like, obviously we could talk about each population in much more detail, but we're not gonna, this is just kind of the overview. We're gonna now move to Hispanic and Latinx clients. How many of you identify as Hispanic or Latinx or work predominantly maybe with this population? I no longer, I mean, I have clients, but when I was in a school setting, this was primarily the population that I served. Are any of you bilingual, Spanish speakers? Yes, I see a lot of people saying they're bilingual. So you, like I said, take this with a grain of salt. You are the experts, but just things to think about. Hispanic refers to a person who comes from a Spanish-speaking country. That's just the definition of this. Latino refers to a person who comes from a country in Latin America. So sometimes people interchange that and it's not interchangeable. So you just want to make sure that's a semantics language thing. Okay. Latino for most people is considered an ethnicity, not a race. So many Latinos might identify as white or black or mixed race, but Latinos generally an ethnicity, and the race is a different identity that they hold. Level of fluency, this, I got to say this here, and those of you that are bilingual and work with bilingual clients, you probably see this. Don't assume level of fluency, right? Don't assume they come in and they are speaking English and what you assume is at a pretty fluent level that they want to receive services in English, right? They might be more comfortable in their native language. So always ask what their preferred language is. If possible, you want to have a translator or someone who can speak their preferred language, but we know that that's not always the case. But in a perfect world, that would be what we would do. This is common. I'm not going to say this is in every household, but this is common, that the respect towards the father figure is very important. In a lot of households, not every, women often defer to the male head of household. If you identify with this or have clients, you might see this, you might not. So always remember to ask your clients, like, you know, what is your home structure like? I have worked with some clients that said, if we have meetings at school, I would like the father to be there. I will, you know, come to meetings, but I really want dad to sign off on it. That was just a preference for that family. Someone said it's very common and can also be a challenge, right? Like, because there might be deferring to this male figure, father figure. Things to ask, just things to approach with curiosity, things to ask. Okay. This could also be a barrier. Some people are saying it can be a challenge, right? Some people might not, I'm trying to think here, like it might be some women might not seek services, right? Or maybe there is this power structure within the family that we have to respect and follow as well. Okay. Family is incredibly important in Hispanic cultures. A lot of times it's very family community based, and the family members are going to be part of that support system. So questions you always want to ask is, who is part of your support system? That could be, if they have a strong support system, that's definitely a protective factor, right? That's something we want to lean into, something that we want to build up. there's actually research that shows that Hispanic clients respond better to services when their role is framed from a family standpoint. So not so much individualistic, but seeing themselves as a family member, like, for example, like, what is your role in the family? What are the boundaries you have within the family? And framing it from a family perspective often yields better results than being just individualistic. Despite economic disadvantages, families find ways to support their children, even if it comes at a personal disadvantage. Oftentimes, this population, they put education very high and services for their children very high as well. So usually that is a big personal belief, a personal value for these clients. This is interesting too. Hispanic clients are more willing to participate in services when there's a social component. So whether there is like time to communicate with one another, time to share experiences, if it's in a group, and that probably comes more from that family values, right? That we are a family unit, social connections are huge, and community is very big as well. Okay. Now we're gonna move on to Asian clients and things that you need to know if you're working with Asian clients. Not all Asian cultures have the same values and traditions. Asia is a huge continent with many different cultures within it. So, I often don't even like to say Asian clients. It's like, okay, where in Asia are they from, right? Asia's huge. That's like saying a North American client or an American client, okay, right? Like we know that geographically, there's many different geographic locations as well. Yes, same with Hispanic and Latino, right? Like don't assume, it's similar if that we assumed everyone in the United States acted, behaved, had the same values. It's just, you don't want to blanket anything. Major ethnic groups, there's many more: Japanese, Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese. That's just some general ones. Always ask, right? There's many different countries. There's many different subsets within this as well. Things that are generally more in Eastern, I call this like Eastern culture because it's that side of the world. Shame is usually associated with mental health problems. That is a big barrier, is getting them into mental health treatment. It's seen as weak. It is seen as something that we don't really do. So do any of you work specifically with maybe Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese population? Some people definitely focus on this. And once again, this could be based on where you are geographically located. What are some barriers if you work with this population that you have seen? Is it, I know that shame is often associated, or family structure, like my family is not wanting me to seek out treatment, or I've seen different generational things too, right? Like grandma does not agree with how I'm raising my kids. They think I'm raising them to a quote unquote American, and they want me to raise them more traditionally. So just things to consider, ask about. In Asian culture, clients are usually more focused on family systems versus individualism. The individualistic is very Western American culture, just so you know. Yeah, people are posting in the chat, which is good. They feel maybe they don't have independence. Also, I'm reading what people are saying. Trying to reduce the stigma of shame, fear of judgment, those different feelings are things that are worked on as well. Asian clients often focus more on physical symptoms than mental health symptoms. Example, if you were to screen someone for depression, what might be some of the physical symptoms that you would see? In the chat, you're treating someone with depression, not the psychological traits we would see or symptoms. What are some physical symptoms we would see with depression? Fatigue, headaches, right? Brain fog, body aches, lethargic, loss of appetite, right? Weight loss. These are things that you want to ask because sometimes in Asian culture, they focus more on the physical symptoms than the mental health symptoms. So they might say, I'm just really tired. I can't get out of bed. They might not say I'm experiencing depression, but they might explain the physical symptoms more. That's why it's really important that you want to do a biopsychosocial and really get to the bottom of what's going on, right? And this could be medical, which is why I would say if there were physical medical symptoms, we're always going to refer to. But just for you to know, like they might be more focused on the physical than some of the psychological symptoms. Okay. This is just some things to note. Asian Americans who seek help for psychological problems may consult family members, clergy, or traditional healers before mental health professionals. They may do an approach of holistic plus mental health, more Western. So they might be doing acupuncture, or they might be doing more energy healers. That is very big in their culture as well. Presenting problems may need to be reconceptualized in language that embraces their perspective. So if they're very focused on energy imbalances, or they're very focused on maybe more healing practices than talk therapy, you meet them where they're at, right? So they might be talking about an imbalance in yin and yang, a disruption in this energy. That just might be how we are conceptualizing the problems and approaching it when we are working with clients. Clients may ask qualifications and degrees that a client, this should be that the clinician has. Do not take this as offensive. Any client asks you what your qualifications are. I know we sometimes like get, very prideful, like, why are they asking that? Often they want to make sure that you're the expert, right? So they might say, like, tell me more about your background. It's actually fair, right? You don't want to just like have anyone treat you. So don't take it as like they're quizzing you or they're like judging you. It's just really, they probably want to know what skills, what degrees, what knowledge you have that's going to help you as be an expert in this area. Asian clients often prefer direct language. So like to the point. No metaphors might not be super great, unclear. They usually want direct language. They also may prefer Eastern medicine practices. I know someone in the chat said they might prefer home remedies or traditional healers, acupuncture, herbs. There's lots of things that they may use or defer to. That's that Eastern medicine mindset and perspective. Meditation, yoga, religious, you always ask their religion too, because they might have different religious backgrounds. Asia is very diverse, and depending on what their religious background is, that might also play into what is preferred for their treatment plans as well. This is something that you might see as people from different cultures matriculate. Second or third generation clients, so maybe they are American born, maybe their parents are, but maybe grandma and grandpa were not born in the United States. They often have this identity crisis, right? I talked about this a little bit, and you might see this in therapy, not just with Asian clients, but with clients that are second generation, third generation, is they're becoming too Americanized. Have any of you experienced this where clients are saying, my family says that I'm like losing all of the traditions that we have, and they're not happy with it. I've had a lot of second and third generation clients struggle with this and struggle with like, where do I fit in between these two cultures? I have my family values, my family traditions, my family cultures, but then I'm also like, have my friends doing things and I want to do this, and they feel at odds at those two things, or they feel backlash. Yes, intergenerational conflict can arise. That's a difference in values often, right? Or like, this is where they have very like, my grandma does not believe like that I'm parenting my child, or like my mom thinks that I'm parenting my child like very poorly. They don't think I'm disciplining enough. That's where you get some of those intergenerational, family narratives, family stories that we often have to unpack, right? So Jenny said that she had sometimes clients that can't even tell people they're in therapy, right? Like it's taboo. I'm not going to share this with anyone, type of thing. Let me just have some water real quick. Someone saying they've had clients say that they have to, there's something called code switching. Like they feel like when they're with their friends, they, you know, follow a certain way of speaking, a certain values, certain way of acting. And then when they're at home, they have to code switch to maybe be more formal or speak in a certain language. Oh, someone asked about eye contact. I should have said this one. It's the Native American indigenous population might not give eye contact because sometimes looking directly. So thank you for asking that. This is for Native, I'm going to say it again so you don't get confused. Indigenous clients may not give direct eye contact because it's seen actually as a sign of disrespect. So thank you for asking that. If you see a question that says, you know, a client's like looking down, don't assume that they're withdrawn, or always like consider what is culturally appropriate. Also like shaking hands, that type of stuff. Also think of not just with clients in general, some cultures touch is much more appropriate than in other cultures. So just things to think about when you are approaching and working with clients. That's a good, that is a very good question. So thank you for asking. Okay. African American clients. This is something to just consider. African American clients are less likely to receive mental health services than white clients. In the chat, why do you think this is? It's actually significantly less that they seek out mental health care. Why? What are some barriers? What are some values? What are some cultural considerations? Why might African American clients get, yes, discrimination, number one, right? We systematically have been in a society where they are discriminated against and they don't have access to services at the same rate as white clients. Distrust of systems, like I am not going to go to therapy. I have had many bad experiences. I don't trust. Going to therapy and getting mental health services is very vulnerable. I always tell clients, like, you made it through the door, that's amazing, right? So being vulnerable when there's been systems that don't treat you in a way that is equitable, it's very hard, right? Distrust, racial trauma, maybe, yes, maybe that things have been going on for so long that these behaviors are now normalized. This is just the way of being. Stigma. Thank you. I'm so glad someone said availability of clinicians that look like them. I will say this. Research shows that when clients are paired with someone that looks like them, the results are better. That's for all clients, right? If you can pair a client with someone that looks like them and has the same shared values, treatment outcomes are going to be better. Access, affordability. I'm trying to think what else. Insurance. We know a lot of times mental health services cost money, and historically African American clients have been discriminated against. They are in areas with less resources, so there's a variety of reasons why they are less likely to seek mental health services and receive mental health services. So just things to think about, especially if you are working with clients, especially if you are white and you're working with a client that is from that is African American or does not look like you. These are things I'm always thinking about when I have clients that do not look like me. You have to constantly just be reflecting and thinking about microaggressions, lots of different things. This is what my whole dissertation was on, so it's always at the forefront of my mind as well. African American clients may have fears about the therapist or concerns about discrimination and costs. Why? They oftentimes pay more for services. They oftentimes have been discriminated against. I'm glad someone put in the chat, having clients or having clinicians that look like them. Most social workers are, just historically, are white females. Like a lot of this is hopefully changing as we, get more people licensed, but that might be a barrier. I don't have a therapist I trust or feel like gets me, right? African American clients often have strong ties to family and extended family. So this could be aunts, uncles, grandparents, church friends, community, neighbors. Oral tradition is very important. Why do we think, either if you identify as African American or just thinking about American history, why do you think oral tradition is so important for African American clients? So oral tradition, telling stories, storytelling. Yes, someone said oral tradition means passing down stories verbally, storytelling. That's the way that they pass down history, right? Think back to our systems. They might not have been in formal schooling. So the way that you carry down traditions is by telling stories. And also in African American culture, wisdom, life lessons is very important. It's capturing the experience. Yeah. Also, you got to think back to slavery. They might not have ever had their stories written down in print, right? They were often not included in mainstream history. So it was often omitted. Yes. So oral history is like really important. Storytelling is really important, and passing things down from generation to generation. Just things to think about. Trust and authenticity of the relationship is a must. Clients may take time to open up, share their experiences. Very important. This is for all cultures. Do not rush the process. So say you're like having a slower time to connect and get into maybe some of the deep stuff, that's okay. Particularly in the intake and assessment process. They might be still feeling you out, right? Like, I don't know if I want to share everything with this person. They might not be, like I said, trusting that like what you'll do with the information, right? I've had some clients that I've needed to connect with the school, and they're like, I don't even want the school to know that we're getting services. We don't trust the school. We don't trust that system. So like, we're not going to sign a release of information yet, right? That's absolutely fine. If that's like what their experience is, you respect that and you meet the client where they're at. So just know, don't rush the process. There may be some hesitation. And think of all the like historical reasons, systematic barriers as to why that might be. Okay. Bonnie shared in the chat, overall social work workforce, 58.5% white, 19.9% Black or African American, 12.3% Hispanic, 2% Asian, 3% American Indian or Alaska Native, 0.2% Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, and then other / unknown 5.4%. Things to think about, right? If you like think of like the 0.2% is really staggering, Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander. So things to think about if they are searching for services. Like there's very, very few people that represent what they look like in the field. Yes, someone said, consider the diaspora of the people, the population. Things to ask, things to think about. There might be, I wanted to say this with cultural humility work. A lot of times as social workers, we think we are much more culturally competent than we are. That's just a hard, like we know a lot about it, but sometimes we're scared to ask those hard questions, like, right? It is better if we broach the question and we ask it rather than sitting with the discomfort. That's like what is most important is, have you ever had those sessions where you feel like there's an elephant in the room and I don't want to be the one to say it? Ask the question, address the elephant in the room, because that's how we really get to like really good therapeutic work. And I would say even ask any client, you should ask for feedback, right? What's working with the session? What's not working? Like pacing can be cultural too. Like, are you going too fast? Are you asking too many questions? So just things to think about too. Also, you need to, in the first session, I'm glad someone brought this up. In the intake, you should be going over confidentiality. You should be very straightforward between like what is reportable and what is not. You do not ever want to get into a gray area with that. People need to know in that first session up front. What are the limits of confidentiality? What will be shared? What will not be shared? Right? So things to think about, things to ask about. Okay. White clients, obviously this is just a very big, broad category that we're going to discuss. This is generally from like a Eastern European, Westernized culture. White clients are generally more individualistic. I have this problem, fix the problem, and we're in and out, right? This is just a blanket, right? This does not mean that everyone, this is more thinking about systematically, thinking about geographically, thinking about all of that. White, we already discussed this, but white clients receive mental health treatment at a higher rate than any other group. Other than the flip side of everything we said, why do we think white clients receive mental health treatment at a higher rate? Access, people who look like them, not as much stigma because we are so individualistic, and we're very much like, if there's a problem, fix it. So you go, how many of you have ever worked with a white client that is like very, very goal oriented? Like, let's get 5 sessions done. Or like after 5 sessions, they're like, okay, like, am I done? Right. So oftentimes it's like, let's treat the problem. That's very common in American culture. Let's fix the problem. Let's, raise ourselves up by the bootstrap to move on. They can afford it. They might have access to insurance. They might be able to afford it at a higher level. It's less stigmatized, right? Oftentimes services were set up for white Americans. So often think about that, like who originally was getting these services. It might, like therapeutic clinical services, right? Often outpatient was generally white Americans. Yes, someone said younger clients across the board are coming in more for therapy. I'm so happy because I work with kids. So many teens are saying, I want to go to therapy. I want to talk about these things. So we are moving to a place in the United States where just in general, people are talking more about it, which is great. Divorce is very common, we know, in the United States. It's definitely more the norm than in other cultures, right? Isn't it like 50% divorce rate? So divorce is very common, whereas in other cultures, they might be more of the mindset of, we're going to work it out. And, you made this commitment. So things to think about is divorce is very common. I'm from a divorced family myself, and I know many, many people that are from divorced families. They're from mixed families, right? They have stepchildren, half siblings. That is something that you might see often in therapy as well. Personal desires may be talked about more than the family unit. So how can I fix myself, or how can I fix this problem? And it might be this is not always the case. It may be focused around individualism. How will treatment personally help the client? So like, I have this problem, I want to fix it. Also, I want to say this is just generally, right? We need to also think of a group of, it's generally white Americans that goes very, very underserved rural Americans. So they identify as white, but socioeconomically, they are very, very disadvantaged. And I don't know if any of you work in rural areas, but those are some of the most underserviced areas that there are. I did home visiting in a rural area when I was like in college and right out of college. And there sometimes I would be the only person in the whole county sometimes that was doing early intervention services. How many are there any of you that work in more rural populations where services are much more limited, just even geographically? Luckily with telehealth, we've been able to do better, but there's just not the services. Maybe they are miles and miles and miles away from a big hospital. So getting treatment or getting access to services might be difficult too. So you got to think of like geographic location also has a big effect on clients as well. Okay. Code of ethics. What does it say about cultural awareness and social diversity? You don't need to memorize Yes, someone said, truth is, US mental health system was built around Western and Eurocentric values. White people are more understood in clinical settings. Like I said, it was pretty much built for them. So yes, that's going to be the narrative that prevails. There's a lot of work out there about like dismantling this and being culturally humble, but yes, that is the history and that is the reality of it. Code of Ethics says we need to be culturally competent. I don't love the word cultural competency because how can we be competent in any one culture, right? I like cultural humility, but it says we should understand culture, we should recognize strengths, be sensitive to other people's cultures and differences amongst cultural groups. You will probably at some point when you get your license have to take cultural competency, cultural humility trainings. Most states require that you have ethics CEs in cultural competencies. So it is an expectation of the profession that we have education. We are constantly trying to get resources to learn more about different diverse cultures. This is specifically in the Code of Ethics. It's a little dated now since the pandemic, but this is in regards to technology. The pandemic has definitely like allowed more access based on different cultures, but not everyone wants to do telehealth services, right? I have some clients that are like, I don't want to do telehealth services. It does not like work for me. I really appreciate in-person services. So don't assume also like every client has access or has comfortability or feels comfortable using telehealth. Okay. Accepting gifts. This is always a question that people ask me, like to accept a gift or to not accept a gift. I will ask yes or no. Does the Code of Ethics give clear guidance on yes or no for accepting gifts? A little ethics pop quiz. It's vague. It does not give a yes or no. It's not clear. It's very gray area. So that's like what's hard. It's like, like I think that oftentimes we're taught in our grad programs, like never, ever, ever accept a gift, but the Code of Ethics actually does not give any clear guidance. It really is, you have to use your clinical judgment. It depends. There are obviously, we're going to talk a little bit more about, there's some cases that are absolute no-nos, right? Like if someone's buying you a car, that's a huge no. If someone's writing you a check, that's a no. But what if someone got you some small trinket, right? It depends. What if they made you some cookies? What if you're in their home doing a home visit and they offer you a snack, right? Like these are all things to think about. And in some cultures, it's actually going to hurt the therapeutic relationship if you don't accept the gift. Like that could, you always, so I will say there's no yes or no. Take into account why you're accepting the gift. Is there a monetary value? What's the motivation for giving the gift? And why would you accept or reject the gift? Okay. So you got to think of all of these things within reason, always. And if you are a little stuck, seek supervision. I've had a case where a client tried to give me something and I ended up using it for the whole entire agency versus for myself. That was like, and I said to them, thank you. I usually don't accept gifts. I will use this. I will give it to the agency so the agency can use it as a resource. For test purposes, it's going to be pretty clear. If it says like, a client's giving you something like that's more than like a handmade item, no. Anything with monetary value, no. For test purposes though, if it says a client made you, I've seen this as a test question. It says a client, a child client upon termination gave you flowers. What do we think? Yes or no? Child client, end of services, gave you flowers. I think yes, accept it. Food depends. It depends on like what you are accepting or not accepting. I would say if you work in the home, always make clear if you're going to take snacks or not. Like I had some, you want to be just clear up front with home visiting, right? Like some people, no, I will bring my own food or drinks, right? Then there's some people that like part of the therapeutic process is sharing a meal with the client in the home. The correct answer is probably explore why you want to accept the gift. Explore what their considerations are for giving the gift. I would say though, it's going to be quite clear on for test purposes, if it's a yes or a no. Does that make sense? It's not always clear, but like, it's obviously no client, client asked to, okay, here's one. What if end of therapy services and client says, I'm going to take you out to dinner? No, right? Like we're not going to go out to dinner with our client, or they're not going to pay for us to go have a meal. What if a client those brings you cookies that they made at Christmas time? Right? Yes, I'm probably going to take that and say thank you. But that's all like, maybe your agency says no food, just depends. So just things to think about. And anytime you do accept a gift, I would document it. I would document it because you just never want to get in a situation. And you don't want anything to be the expectation that like, you have to give me a gift to get services. Someone asked about bartering. That's often comes up. 99.9% of the time, bartering is not going to be an acceptable form of payment. So like, you do this service for me and I do this service for you. It's only acceptable according to the Code of Ethics to barter for services if geographically in that part of the world or that location, it is an acceptable practice. Like if that is what occurs in your community, yes, but in 99.9%, it's not going to be. Oh, someone said, what if, okay, I'll ask this to the group. What do we think, group? Someone asked, what if someone made you a homemade item after they were discharged on their last session and they give it to you? What do we think? Yes or no? And it says, thank you. It's specifically for me. I would say yes. You can accept that. It happens to me all the time. They're showing gratitude for your services, right? Like, thank you. This was really meaningful to me. Always does this cause more harm? I had a little kiddo, he was 4, bring me flowers and tea on the last time. I was not going to say, no, I can't accept your flowers and your tea. He was 4 years old, right? So things to think about. Okay. I will say, I had to deal with this a lot when I was having the baby. They'd say, do you have a baby registry? I want to buy you a gift. And I so many times had to say, no, you cannot buy me a gift off of my baby registry, right? Like really appreciate that. But then I did have like a client, a teen client that when I had the baby, brought me a stuffed animal. I accepted that, thank you for bringing them a stuffed animal. Do you see how it's different? Like it was things I had to think about. It was like a little tiny stuffed animal, thank you. Versus, can I buy you something off of your registry? So things to think about. Okay. Child abuse and neglect. Child abuse and neglect is child abuse and neglect. It does not matter what their cultural is. If they are for mandated reporting, it does not matter. Yes, we can educate, we can do things, but if it constitutes abuse and neglect, we have to report no matter what. I have seen this as a test question. It is in this person's culture, it's appropriate to give a baby some alcohol in their bottle to deal with pain. Do we report yes or no? Giving alcohol, liquor to a baby in a bottle for pain. Yes, we have to report. I would tell them, here is some psychoeducation. My apologies. Here's some psychoeducation, but this is a reportable offense. Okay. In some cultures, corporal punishment is allowed. Spanking is allowed. These types of things. We just need to always go on what are our child abuse and neglect laws in the United States for test purposes. Obviously, we would be working with the family. We'd be providing support when but for test purposes, child abuse and neglect is child abuse and neglect. Okay, there's some additional resources here. This will be there. Actually, the new DSM, it's not really new anymore, has a cultural formation interview, which basically takes into account culture when you are trying to diagnose, which is great because we know that everyone is going to maybe present differently and there's different cultural norms. Like, for example, what do headaches mean for some cultures versus like what does lack of sleep mean for some cultures? So just things to think about. Someone said, what about legal status and possible deportation? That's a really hard one. However, like we have to report child abuse and neglect. Like there might be a fallout, there might be consequences, but if the child is in danger, we have to report no matter what. Yes, so that's for minors. That's for minors. Okay. Any questions on anything we covered today? I know it was a lot. My voice is cutting out. Oh, someone said for adults, you do not report domestic violence. No, if it's an adult and there's domestic violence, we are not mandated reporters of domestic violence. Just FYI. Okay. And a lot of times people said they have protocols they have to follow if you do have undocumented students or you can be vague in your documentation, but in regards to abuse and neglect, if it's a minor, we have to report abuse and neglect no matter what.